Hey, thanks everybody for joining us again here today at Sunnyside. It's putting the garden to bed day. We'll talk about some fall projects and getting ready for winter here as it's teeming down rain on the roof. It's definitely a fall day today. So I had Nicole, she's in the background there. She always has the pretty backdrop. I get the pallet wall.
And Good morning, everyone.
Mr. Smith is here today as well, the Whistling Gardener, to help answer some questions. So make sure you give him some tough ones here during class and keep him on his toes. But thanks again for joining us. No fancy slideshow today. We're going to chat about some topics. I got some products I'll grab and whip in and out of here. And hopefully we'll teach you a few things as we get ready for winter time here. Now, this is, everybody's got the handout, I hope. You know, just kind of a list of some things that I always kind of try to get done in my yard here. I like to get it done here with fall, early winter, so that maybe we have a little bit less work come springtime again. So there are plenty of things that we can still do here in the garden. I thought always a good place to start here as we're heading towards winter is talk a little bit about plant hardiness, our hardiness zone, you know, kind of how the fall goes. You know, I wish I had a magical gardening crystal ball and I could tell you, well, you're going to get your first frost on this day or this week or that week. But we just have to watch the weather. We really haven't. I got a light frost at my house in Everett here about a week ago, but you might be a little different microclimate locally here and maybe haven't gotten hard frost yet. You know, I should say, I'm sure there's a lot of folks joining us maybe from other parts and states and other areas. You know, we're talking about Puget Sound here today for the winter, so this may not apply to Eastern Washington or colder climates as well, although a lot of the principles certainly would still apply as well. But if we talk plant hardiness, you know, right in our locale, you know, the USDA hardiness zone would tell you that we're zone 8. I would probably tend towards zone 7 myself. Steve and I always disagree on this one. But whether you're zone 7, zone 8, you can make your own choice. The point of it is, as we start to get colder in here in winter, you know, what do we need to worry about protecting? Do we have containers that we need to worry about? Certain plants in the landscape that maybe aren't quite as hardy? Do we need to store some things? So those are all kind of considerations as you look around your yard and you know, what's going to be back next year. You know, all the plants in our ground, we hopefully obviously can save from season to season. So keep in mind our hardiness zone. I would always recommend watching the weather. You know, the weather forecasts get better and better. You know, we've always joked up here in Western Washington, just do the opposite of what the weatherman says. If he calls for sun, it's going to rain, and vice versa. But the coldness is always pretty accurate. So always look a week or two ahead. If you see the polar vortex dropping down for some strange reason again, then yeah, let's get some things protected and make sure our plants are okay in the yard, okay? So if we kind of start, we'll follow the handout if you've got it, but we'll start talking, you know, a little bit about kind of getting ahead on some spring projects. You know, here in Western Washington, one thing that we're kind of known for is our big, juicy, fat slugs. You know, they're everywhere. They're in the shade garden. If we don't get too cold, they're kind of hanging out most everywhere. And the big thing with me is as they lay eggs under debris around plants they like that will hatch out next year, you know, how can we kind of keep the slug damage to a minimum? So here in the fall, you know, I certainly would consider spreading a little slug bait here and there. You know, we carry all natural slug baits here at Sunnyside. We're not interested in old metal aldehydes and the poison. The things that we would have would be pet safe, people safe. They're just not slug safe. So if you want to get rid of the slugs the organic way, the main thing is iron phosphate. Now, many of you may have seen the Sluggo brand. You know, this is just iron phosphate. You'll see right on there the Omri label. It's all organic. We don't have any poison in there. And if I spread Sluggo out, you know, it would really help protect, get rid of some of the slugs this fall, and then particularly towards the tail end of winter. Maybe I put a rim of that down around my plants a little bit earlier than you might think of. Now those slugs can't get into that crown. So if I've got, you know, whatever plant it is in your yard, maybe a special perennial or something else you notice tends to have a lot of slug damage, let's clean the debris away from that here before we get into winter. We could always put a ring of that Sluggo down, especially as we get into next February, and keep them from even getting back into that crown. We're probably going to have a little less slug damage that way. So iron phosphate's the way to go. You'll see the options with slug control in just form. So this is Sluggo Max, same exact product, same organic, The difference with this is the attractant. This will cover about 10 times the amount of square footage. So if you want to maximize your square footage, get the Max. It's the same product, just a different attractant. And if you want to add some soil insect killing, we do Bug and Slug Killer from Bonide, another organic thing. This is just iron phosphate plus spinosad or spinosad. This would be a natural bacteria that would help eliminate some of the bad things in our soil. So any one of those things will help you get kind of a little head start on slugs for springtime. Now, if we talk the second one, there's weeds. You know, nobody likes to have the weedy garden, and this is the time of year maybe we can get ahead a little bit come springtime. We're starting to get cold. You know, if you're going to have to do some spraying, you want to do it here pretty quick. We need a sunny day, you know, usually mid, 50 degrees or up to get most of the herbicides to work. And we want to get it done here fairly quick. We're not going to have many more days where before things will go dormant. We're not going to get much action with herbicides over the winter. We would wait and do it coming out of winter again once we warm up. So if you look at the first one, would be the lawn. You know, maybe you weren't at the lawn class I did in September and you need to get a little bit of weeds taken care of on the lawn. You know, we carry two options here. Weed Beater Ultra from Bonide. This is something I could spray on my turf, not damage grass, but kill all the broad-leafed weeds or the majority of them. So as long as we're above 45 degrees, this particular product works a lot better in colder climates in the fall. And again, in early spring, I would recommend looking again. So Weed Beater Ultra from Bonide may be a good way to go to get some of those lawn weeds taken care of. That is chemical. There's nothing organic about the Weed Beater Ultra. If you want the organic side, this is what I use, Weed Beater FE. This is a natural iron product. Frankly, also takes care of moss and some other things in the grass as well. But this would be the natural side where I don't have to use chemical if you want to go that route. And again, still very effective as long as we're in those upper 40s, low 50 degree mark. Say you got a couple more weeks to get that done. If we're going to kill weeds in landscape beds, you know, the driveway, the walkway areas where maybe we don't have plants, well, we're going to be real careful not to get herbicide on the plants we do want to keep. We can get something natural like the botanical cleanup. So this is a natural herbicide that would kill grasses and weeds. We don't want to put this on our lawns, but this is something I could apply on things again in my gravel, my driveway cracks, certain areas of the yard, and get some pretty good weed death with something natural that's not chemical at all. So that kind of gets you a little bit of weed. And obviously you can do like I do, whip out the kneeling pad and go the old fashioned route and start popping the top weed before it starts popping in your yard. So we can always walk around with the rain, the soil being a little bit moist now. It's very easy to walk around, use a good tool like a hula hoe, so your favorite weeding device, and start hand weeding some of that as well in the beds. And then we don't have those going to seed and giving us a bazillion more come 2022, okay? Now, as we're not quite there yet, because again, most of us haven't had hard frost, but as we get into the coming weeks here, later October to into November, you know, most of our perennials are going to start going dormant. You know, that's the third point on there, that we kind of want to start cleaning up some of those perennials. You know, I kind of chuckle. I think I borrowed this from Steve many moons ago, but it's a great way to think about it. You've got mushers and you've got sticks. So if we got something like a Hosta, I'll pull one up here. You know, let's be honest. If we have Hosta in our yard, the leaves kind of turn color and then they turn to melt and they're almost like a spot of slimy snot in the soil when these are done. I can kind of pick that up and throw it in the yard waste, and I've got my Hosta cleaned up for the fall. Other plants, you know, like coneflowers, rudbeckias, a lot of other plants, you know, this is a coneflower, not quite dormant yet. We don't want to cut these off until they're dormant, so don't run out and do this today. But this one in a few weeks will be totally yellow and brown and down to the ground. I have a little bit more woody or sticky structure to something like that, so I can cut that back just a couple inches out of the ground and still see where it is. I'm not going to step on it this winter. I'm going to protect the crown so that I have a really nice perennial coming right back out come spring 2022. So watch your perennials. I mean, they're getting close. Again, don't run out and do this here today. You probably got another week or two, depending on what the weather does. But we are getting close to kind of time to start cleaning up some of those perennials here for fall. Now you'll see that that last point is kind of debris and mulch. And everybody comes to my classes knows I'm a little on the OCD side. And it's really tough for me to walk out in the yard and leave all the debris on the ground. Now, it's a great benefit to your soil. And frankly, you'll harbor some insects. The hummingbirds will eat them in the winter. I mean, there's a lot of reasons not to clean up everything. So I kind of fight this battle between neat and natural. And I'll do maybe half of mine, areas that I'm like, all right, I can clean that up. And they still got plenty back there, you know, so we can clean up some, get some of these plants mulched and protected, and we're ready to go for spring. Then whatever's left coming out of winter, we could apply compost or mulch over the top. That adds nutrients to the soil, or we can do our kind of rake up, clean up come springtime. So if you want my own personal feeling, and Steve's probably going to answer some questions in a different way, is I'm going to look out my yard and look for things that I know perhaps are a little bit slug prone. Those are the things I want to get cleaned up and out of there. I don't want eggs hanging out on the old foliage. I want to clean that up, get it to the yard waste in the compost pile, and then I can put some compost or mulch over the top of that ground, protect it for the winter, and know where it is. Then come springtime, 1st of March, I can take that mulch, lightly move it away, make myself a little moat circle, add my spring dose of organic fertilizer, and cover that right back up with the mulch, and off we go for another gardening season. So that's kind of how I do most of my perennials at my place. Now, if we get into some of these other subjects here, you know, and there's probably going to be a lot of specific questions. We'll have time after the class. I'm sure you guys will hit Steve up with a few as well. But if we talk about storing bulbs, you know, that's a huge one this time of year as we come out of summer. The dahlias, the lilies, I mean, we go on, canna lilies, all kinds of things that maybe you do want to save or make sure that you have them for another year. Digging them up and storing them might be an option for a lot of folks. So, you know, for me in my yard, I know a lot of my beds were built up 20 years ago when we did our house. So I don't necessarily pull my dahlias and things, and I have good luck bringing them back year to year. It's not usually the cold up here, it's the wet. You know, we get a lot of rain, that water table comes up in the wintertime. We can't have those things sitting in a wet spot, or we're going to lose them to rot. So you know, what advice would I give you? I don't know. If you know your soil real well and you know you've got good drainage, you know, maybe try leaving a couple of dahlias and some things like that in the ground and seeing what happens next year. If they don't come back, okay. Now I know going forward I need to dig those clumps and store them over the winter. That way I can replant them the coming spring and have that dahlia go forever. So if you look at that list there, you know, dahlias are one that, again, for me, I leave in the ground. Begonias are a real common one a lot of folks would like to dig. If I want to save a begonia, I have to dig those bulbs and store those in the garage, the basement, a number of different places. That's one I have to pull. Canna lilies, I think some people might leave them in. I tend to do more of my cannas in containers, so those have already come out and been cut back, and they will get stored. And then again, I'll have those again for next year when I replant them again. So look, you know, maybe you've got a specific bulb. You could ask Steve or ask me after the class, but just keep that in mind as we go into winter. To me, it's drainage on a lot of them. If you know you've got great drainage, leave them there and see what happens. It's not typically the cold, although if you've got a tropical something that has to be pulled, yes, we want to get that pulled out here fairly quickly before we get a hard frost, okay? Now, if we go to that next one and we talk a little bit about the lawn, again, maybe you were at the lawn class I do in September, but we'll just touch on just a couple things here as lawn. If you haven't gotten to it, yes, get a dose of good organic lawn food down this time of year. I brought a bag of our go-to lawn food in here. This is E.B. Stone Organics. Used to be called Nature's Green, but it's a great lawn food. Nothing's changed from the old formula. I think that's the best one on the market. When I apply a good organic lawn food, I'm going to have the root system be happy here over the winter, add some humic acid, a little bit of nitrogen, and I'm going to keep my lawn much nicer over the winter, and that'll get it into that springtime when I can reapply my spring dose as we get into April 2022. So don't forget about a dose of food. I brought a bag of lime in. This one's a little heavier. Let's see if I can do it backwards. So this is Lightning Line. Now that's a product that I would always add onto my turf in the fall and again in spring, if you want my opinion, at least once a year. With all the rain coming down in fall, when we do lime, that'll soak into the soil structure, change my pH a little bit. It's going to make it more alkaline versus our typical acidic soils. I'm going to have less moss to deal with coming springtime. So if I can get the pH of my lawn area up, I'm going to have happier grass, not as much moss to deal with. It's not a moss killer, but something that'll really help your soil and make it more adequate to serve the turf, okay? So there's a couple lawn. The last thing with lawns to me would be turf disease. Now I fight this at my yard in Everett. I'm kind of a non-chemical guy. It's a hard one to control. Things like red thread, eventually snow mold, dollar spot, you know, we can go on and on. A lot of these turf or thatch diseases that get into our Pacific Northwest turf when it is wet and a little bit colder here from now, you know, until next March or April. It typically doesn't kill out your whole lawn. I mean, just to be honest, but you're going to look out and see some dead patches over the winter as that fungus attacks the grass. I could rake that up in spring, apply some overseed, put a dose of lawn food on. I'm probably right back to normal. Everything looks great again. I'm not worried about it as much. If I really want OCD turf here over the winter, and I do not want to see that, I need to get some sort of product on there to keep the turf disease to a minimum. So a chemical option would be something like Infuse from Bonide. I put that in my spreader. I put that out on the turf. That's a systemic fungicide that will help control a lot of those turf diseases. Maybe you're like me, not wanting to go the chemical route. We can apply some other things on the turf, like maybe a copper fungicide spray, neem oil. Wow, it just got quiet in here. The rain stopped. Something like neem oil. There's some natural options as well. Yes, I have to do them a little bit more often than dumping down a bag of systemic, but it can be done the natural way too. Or like I said, live with a little bit in the winter. It's not going to kill your lawn. We get to springtime, we put some food down, and off we go for 2022. We're right back in business again, okay? Now, the next one on there is Dormant Spraying. Now, again, we're not quite dormant yet. Things are still turning color. I got leaves all over my trees. We're not kind of dormant spray time yet. But as we go through the coming months here, you know, these are some of the things that I would consider doing in my yard. Dormant spraying is a great project to get you ahead for the coming season. In particular, if you saw your landscape this year and you fought disease or insect on certain plants, a tree, a shrub, whatever it was, those are the things that I'm going to try to really get at this fall and make sure all of the leaves are cleaned up and out of there. I don't want old rose foliage sitting on the ground where I've got a chance of getting that disease back. You know, dogwood leaves, fruit is a huge one. You know, I don't want old fruit rotting on the ground. Maybe I get the worms back, the apple maggots, you know, different issues on the foliage. I want to clean that up. And if I can apply a dormant spray, I'm going to be that much farther ahead for the gardening season. So for us here at Sunnyside, I think the superior way to go is those two guys mixed together there. That is an organic horticultural oil. This is a natural fungicide called Liquicop. Now, if I can put these into the same sprayer and do this once, nobody wants to work twice. I can mix these two together and cover everything in once. When I typically use an oil, you know, let's pretend my arm or my hand here is oil. I spray it on there, the oil is going to run and coat every single crack and crevice and cut off oxygen. So if I apply an oil and I've got a bug or a scale or an egg stuck to my wood and I cover that with oil, I'm going to end up winning because I've just cut off the oxygen supply. Not going to hurt my plant, but I'm going to eliminate the majority of the things that are stuck to my wood. A lot of times they're tucked in little buds on the branches. I mean, they could be anywhere. But again, if I know I had a bug or I want to make sure I don't get one, that's an easy way to apply an oil and really keep a lot of that to a minimum. The other half of that was the copper. Now, this is the disease part of it. There's a lot of good copper sprays on the market, but we found that Liquicop probably lasts the longest. If I'm wet, like today, I need a dry day to do this. Let's start with that. I'm going to pick a day where it's dry, spray this on. I need 4, 5, 6 hours for this to dry on. Then I don't care if it rains after that. So if I apply copper, This is going to dry on to a lot of my buds, my bark. It's got a little bit of blue tint to it, but this would last for about 30 days in the rain. So if I get on this in the winter, I've almost got a shield up where the wind and the rain is blowing a spore from my neighbors or down the road and go back on my tree. I'm going to keep the chances of getting a particular disease back to a minimum. So just think at some point here, later November, December, January, February, before we start breaking bud for the next spring, try to get a dormant spray, especially on those things that you know are a little bit more prone to bugs or diseases, or that you had some issues with in the last gardening season, okay? Now, we mentioned a little bit about fruit and berries, and that's kind of what most people, I think, traditionally think of as dormant spraying. I've got fruit trees, I got to spray. I got berries, I want to spray. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good idea for most of this stuff. In particular, peaches, cherries, apricots, nectarines, things that maybe we shouldn't have as good a luck with here west of the mountains. It's a great way, again, to keep the disease to a minimum and start next year clean. So think of definitely fruit as one option. Berries would be kind of up to you. I don't know that you need to run out and get all of your berries, but again, if I had a problem with my blueberry or my raspberry or certain things, the dormant spray would certainly help you here as we go dormant in the winter and make them a little cleaner come the next springtime, okay? Now, big thing with me with fruit is let's kind of play, you know, we'll pick a couple things. A lot of folks come in here and ask about something like apple maggot. You know, they got their fruit to develop. There's a little brown hole in the side. They go to eat it or cut it open. There's a brown trail and a nasty worm in the middle of their apple. Those are not edible. You don't want to eat an apple with apple maggot. You know, that's a specific problem that I do not want to leave old fruit hanging on my tree. Like I said, I don't want debris on the ground. I want to get all that cleaned up this fall and thrown away or composted properly so that I don't have the chance of that to fester in the soil and get right back up on my same tree again come the next year. It's the same with the disease end of it. Let's say I had apple scab, you know, something that gets on the foliage and the fruit. Not the end of the world, you know, it's not, you can still eat an apple that has scab on it. It's not the prettiest thing, but it's not going to hurt anything. But if I want to minimize that come the next season, again, I don't want those leaves sitting on the ground all winter. I'd rather have you clean those up here in the fall when they drop, get rid of them so that we can start next year as clean as possible. You know, same on the berry side of it. If we pick maybe something like blueberries, you know, maybe I had mummyberry, you know, a mildew. It could be anything on the foliage or perhaps a bug or two. As these blueberries go dormant, same thing. Let's get those cleaned out, get into the crown of that blueberry, get all that old debris out of there, remove the old wood that's doing nothing, get some better air circulation, and have a happier plant, again, going into the next gardening season that way, okay? Now, the next one on there is vegetable gardening. So, you know, we probably planted, a lot of folks have put in some cool season crops. I'm not going to run out and tell you you got to pull everything out of the ground yet. You're still going to probably get a lot of broccoli and lettuce and kale and cabbage and carrots and beets and some of the cooler season vegetables. We've still got some time for those to develop and do some more harvesting. I think the tomatoes and that side of it's probably done here pretty quick with the rain we've got in the colder nights. But we can certainly keep that vegetable garden ready to go for the coming season so that we can run right back out in late winter, early spring, and start getting cold season vegetables going right away again. Now, maybe you've got a raised bed. You know, maybe you do it in the ground in a plot. Most folks, I think, have kind of a dedicated area that they would like to grow vegetables in, whether it's rows or a box or containers or whatever. You know, this is the time of year, as I pull these fall things out, maybe I don't want to leave that bare ground. It's a great place to apply mulch on. You know, maybe you're going to cover it with straw. You could use a cover crop, you know, if you wanted to add some nutrients back into that soil, throw out some crimson clover, buckwheat. There's a lot of options that I could throw that on the soil surface, let those grow for the winter, then turn that over come springtime, add some nutrients to the soil, and have the happier vegetable garden going into the coming spring. So keep it in mind. The one thing I always do in the fall, we talked about lime on lawns. you know, I would get your lime down in the vegetable garden too. Vegetables are going to like the soil a little bit sweeter than our typical landscape shrubs. So whether you do it now in the fall, let the rain get that down into the soil structure, or we do this in later winter so that, again, it's got a chance to get down into the soil, again, you're going to have a much happier vegetable garden if we can sweeten that up a little bit, okay? Now, if we go to the second page there, roses. You know, we do a couple rose classes here a year. We kind of never do one in the fall, so this is always a topic that comes up at this class, as well as the pruning class here in a couple weeks. But for roses, you know, they're probably still blooming. You probably got some flowers on them. Mine do at the house too, but they're getting close. You know, we haven't gotten super cold winters here for a number of years, and I don't know that the rose is ever going to go totally dormant. I mean, you're left with some leaves here and there, probably not much flower over winter, but typically they look like they're still going over the winter months. Our rule has always been this, you know, we look at Veterans Day in November, so 3-4 weeks out. We try to get our roses down to hip high. You know, that's kind of a safe height that maybe snow, wind, rain, like today, we're not going to break anything, but we're going to have a happy, sturdy structure to kind of last through the winter. So I would always recommend hip high in the fall. Then we get to February, like President's Weekend time, and we go knee high. So if you kind of remember that hip high in the fall, knee high in spring, and those two holidays, it's a pretty good guide for all the roses to get you kind of somewhat cut back in the fall. Then when we get into that January, early February time frame, now we want to go down to knee high mid-February, but I also don't want any leaves left. I don't want anything on the ground. I don't want old flowers. I don't want any foliage left, because I can guarantee you, you don't see it with the naked eye, but that's going to give you black spot, mildew, all the things that we don't want on our roses. As the spring comes and the new foliage comes out, you're going to get all that stuff right back again. So that is one plant I would always make sure the debris is cleaned up, and we make sure we strip the foliage and cut it back pretty heavy come President's in February. Now, this isn't all roses. You're probably going to go, he's insane. I got a climbing rose. No, we're not going to cut a climbing rose that's covering our arbor down to the knee height. So we're going to tidy it up, clean the foliage, but we're not interested in cutting it back nearly as hard, because you just waited years for it to grow and cover your arbor. So this would be shrub roses, hybrid teas, floribundas, David Austins, all the different roses that we grow here in our climate. That's the sequence I would follow, not necessarily for the climbing roses, okay? You know, then we, like I said, we get to mid-February, we put some food down on them, we put some mulch over that, we strip the leaves, we get down to knee-high, and off we go for a successful rose growing season for 2022, okay? Now, the next one's probably a big one. This is one I'm guessing you're probably going to braid Steve with some questions on. You know, how do I save my tender plants? You know, there's a lot of different options. There's a lot of ways to do it. If you kind of think of it, to me, is it a house plant? Is it a garage plant? A basement plant, perhaps? You know, there's a lot of places we could put a geranium, a fuchsia, you know, the bulbs we talked about earlier. A lot of plants we could save year to year if you want to, in a cooler, drier place like that. We don't want them growing. We don't want to water them a bunch. We don't want to feed them. We just want to basically torture them and keep them barely alive. And then come spring, now we can go back outside, pump the food on, start watering, and off we go for another season. So maybe with that subject, you know, I would say this, you know, I try to save some things. I'm not a waster. I don't see the big point as geranium and the fuchsia. I would rather come replace it with a fresh, healthy plant the next spring so I don't have to overwinter it. But if you want to, maybe it's a special variety or something you've always done, or something from the mom or the grandmother. We've all had things like that in our gardens. And yeah, you don't want to maybe let those things go away. So ask some questions. Steve's there to answer, or ask me after class, and we could talk about certain things that you may want to consider bringing into the garage, maybe tucking in the basement near a window, or certainly if you got a greenhouse, like we do at Sunnyside here, then more power to you. You can turn the heat on and just keep them going all winter. That's an easy way to go as well, okay? Now, the next one, we'll talk just a little bit about transplanting, and dividing things. You know, transplanting comes up at every class I teach during the course of the year, whether we're doing rhodies or maples or roses or whatever. Somebody always asks, when can I move it? When can I dig it up? When can I do this? You know, this is about the time of year when we're dormant, just a few more weeks after frost, sap has stopped flowing, things have gone dormant. I can have near 100% success if I take enough root system and move something in the dormant season. So I would probably say, you know, Thanksgiving-ish time till like the 1st of March. That's my time of year when I can go out and dig up a shrub and relocate it in the yard. You know, take a clump of hostas and cleave it into 3 and divide my perennials to get more. You know, you're getting to that time of year when all this can happen and you're going to have 100% success or near 100% success. You know, doing this in the growing season is much tougher to have success with. So we can still do that here over the winter. Now, you're always going to want to add something to get the root system developed. You know, we do a lot of sure start here. If I'm moving something or transplanting something, that's what I want to make sure I pop into the hole. I'm going to help the root system grow, help it develop there over the late winter, so I've got a happier plant come springtime. So always use a little transplanter. And I'm going to show you one special tool here. This has been a really popular shovel around here. This is a shovel made by Radius called the Root Slayer. Now, if I look at that thing, it looks like kind of a Conan the Barbarian weapon. You know, I better not put this on my toe or I'm going to lose a toe out in the yard. So be real careful with it. But you can see I've got a serrated edge. I've got a very sharp blade at the tip. You know, if I turn that up, you can kind of see it. Now, if I put my boot on that and I stick that through a clump of perennials, it is really easy. If you're dividing things, I think this is the superior shovel. Yes, a spade will work if you got one, but if you want to make your life easier, I think the Root Slayer is a great tool to have around for dividing, for transplanting, even woody shrubs. You know, I could put the tip of this on a root and cleave through it, or turn this sideways and do a quick little saw job and not have to have 2 or 3 tools out with me as I'm moving something in the landscape. So keep that in mind here as we get into fall. Again, I don't think you're quite there yet, but in the coming weeks here, when we go dormant, leaves are gone, now's my opportunity to kind of rearrange the garden. All of us gardeners like to move things around. I can guarantee you my yard's full and I'll be moving something this winter. I think I'd like you better over here because then I can add something in that spot. So keep that in mind here as we get into the winter time, okay? You know, part of that is the next one is follows for planting. You know, we've tried this. I've been doing nursery work for, 32 years now, and we always promote follows for planting, follows for planting. Some years it gains more traction, other years it doesn't. But to be brutally honest, the entire year, this is the best time to put stuff in the ground. As you hear the rain on the roof, I've got rain coming, I've got wet soil, I'm still warm in the soil coming out of winter, and I will develop a nice root system here as we go through fall and have that much more established plant come spring and summer 2022. So if you're looking to add some things, yes, the selection maybe isn't quite as much at the nursery here this time of year. There's still a lot of great options, but we can get this done now with some planting, and then early spring, we're going to have a much happier plant next summer that's going to need a little bit less water. You know, my recommendation personally this time of year is especially if I'm doing a slope, you know, a bank, a far back corner of the yard that I maybe don't get the water to as much, this is the time of year I'd really try to get those places done, because again, I could plant my ground cover on a slope, mulch it. I've got rain to take care of it all winter. If we had a magic camera down underneath the soil, I think you would be shocked how much root development occurs. Now we get to next summer, I'm that much more established and I've got a much happier plant that I don't have to water as much coming in the next season, okay? So don't forget about follows for planting. Use Sure Start, get some good compost to mix in your hole, get those plants mulched properly, and we're gonna have great success going into the next season, okay? Now, fall pruning, I won't spend a lot of time on fall pruning because tune in 2 weeks. So we do this like the first weekend in November pruning class, and we'll attack some pruning. I want to start by saying this: we're a little too early to prune, if you want my opinion. We want to wait for a good hard frost, sap has stopped flowing, and then we can start attacking the pruning here at some point over the winter. Does everything need to be pruned? No, but you can kind of look in your yard and get some of the structure issues dealt with, maybe head some things back. I do a lot of thinning, on crowded deciduous shrubs. We're never pruning anything evergreen this time of year. We're going to leave that alone and prune that coming out of winter. The one thing, if you tune into the pruning class, we'll go through a lot more of this in depth, but the one thing I would really keep in mind is my rules are always prune after bloom, okay? And be real careful of what blooms on old wood and new wood. As an example, let's say you have a dogwood tree in your yard, turning beautiful color like mine is right now. I've already got all those little flower buds set on those branches that I get to enjoy next May and spring. So if I go out in the winter and I cut back my dogwood, what's going to happen? Not going to hurt the plant, but I've sacrificed the most of my flowers. So keep those things in mind as you choose what to prune. If you come to the pruning class, we'll go through a bunch more of this, but certainly learning what blooms on old wood versus new is a huge part of this, depending on what you'll still get bloom on if we go ahead and prune it this winter, okay? The things I would for sure do is always removing diseased, damaged wood. We got some wind up here today, maybe a little branch snaps or this breaks or whatever. Yeah, get out those and get them out immediately, but look at the structure maybe just a little bit later in winter for the pruning time, okay? Now, just a couple things left there, and you'll see mulching with bark or compost. You could do this in fall, you could do it in spring. I mean, it's really up to you how you want to attack it in your garden, but a really nice layer of bark, of compost, of anything is always going to add nutrients to the soil long-term and protect your soil here over the winter. As we get rain and get cold, it's going to help protect your soil. So again, for me, I use a lot of compost mulch around the perennials as I clean things up here in the next month, 6 weeks. Now I know that's protected. I can scrape it away, add my fertilizer, put the mulch right back over, and I've got a happy plant again going into the next spring. Maybe you want to mulch the whole yard this time of year. That's fine. Maybe let everything go dormant, all your leaves and everything drop, mulch over the whole thing. Then we can kind of add, again, a lot of that leaf material and to the compost layer, and again, add some more nutrition into our soil, okay? So keep in mind the mulch. I would never do a dusting. To me, a properly mulch is going to be 2 or 3 inches deep. Be real careful on woody plants that we don't collect too much up on the trunk. A lot of times we'll feather it, much deeper out around the root system than just a little dusting right around the trunk so it looks nice. But we have to be careful of azaleas and rhodies and pieris and viburnums and a lot of the traditional shrubs we have up here, whether they're evergreen or deciduous, doesn't matter. We don't want to get compost too far up the trunks, then we have issues down the road. So keep that in mind if you choose to mulch here this fall. Now you'll see that last thing is, again, kind of what I kept talking about with perennials. I fight this natural versus need every year, and I'm getting better at it. I used to clean up every single leaf in the yard in the fall, and it was spotless. But then I don't have any bugs, and hummingbirds doesn't have protein. And it's kind of nice to have a little bit of leaf mulch on the ground here and there. So I'll clean up some things and leave others alone. I would leave that up to you. Again, I'm more worried about the plants that are more susceptible to disease, slug damage, insects, making sure those are free and clear so that I can watch them in the winter versus just every single little last plant in the landscape, okay? So I think that's probably overload. I'm just going to show you a couple things. And again, we're going to cover a lot of this at the pruning class. We'll get into a little bit of everything here in a couple weeks, but you saw me, with the Hosta. If we pull this Hosta back up and we're looking at protecting this for the winter, I'm still not quite ready to cut back. It's still got a green stem. Yes, it's turning color. Another 2 weeks, this is going to be a little mound of melted leaves on the soil. And I could cut this off or scrape it off, throw it in the compost heap. He's ready to go. If I want to protect this, maybe I put a little mound of compost or bark over it for the winter. That'll protect the crown. Eventually, you'll see little eyes or the growing tips on a lot of these perennials, we just want to make sure they don't get stepped on, you know, where I don't forget that I had one planted there. So sometimes a little bit of mulch, or I got 2 young boys, a lot of times I'll take little cut off bamboo stakes and stick one in next to it to make sure, hey, if you're out running around that yard in the winter, make sure you don't step on that, so that we'll see you again next spring. So plants like hostas, you know, we looked at the coneflower, you know, let these go dormant. If you cut back a lot of these perennials too early, you're going to get crown rot. You know, I don't want to get this cut back until it has told me I'm done for the year. I'm going to be totally melted brown, yellow, and down on the ground. Now, again, I can get in there, leave a little stub of crown out of the ground, and I'll see you again next year. Maybe you have grasses. You know, again, I'm not running home to do my grasses. I got a whole bunch of them now, but you can see, you know, this is a short little blood grass here. I've still got some red. It's not done yet. But when this is totally brown, maybe later November, early December, you know, I have to cut this back at some point between then and March 1st. So all the old foliage is gone, and now we can start over again. So that's another one that you can consider doing here in the fall. And maybe you've got, like me, you know, heucheritis, the addiction to heucheras, or other evergreen type perennials, hellebores, there's a whole bunch of them. You know, I'm not ever going to cut this back. The reason I bought this is because I want to look out and see a touch of purple or red or orange or whatever color you choose. But maybe I am going to go along the edge and take some of those big leaves and either pinch them out so that I have a little fresher foliage to last for winter, going to look a little nicer. So I would deadhead them, no flowers, and maybe I'm looking for those oldest leaves that I could reach in and pinch off, or grab my pruners and go in there and tidy that up a little bit as well, okay? The last one I'll say for pruning, excuse me, and again, it's not so much, I'm going to send you out today to do this. It's nasty weather anyway. But if we look at this, something like hydrangea, you know, this is a real common question. The pruning class will do this as well. Whether I have PG type hydrangeas with cone flowers in sun, or I have rounded mop head flowers in shade. Typically they're blue. You know, they're getting to the point where they're dry and they're done. I haven't cut mine back yet. It'll probably be another month or so. But at some point here before winter, I just want to get in here and I want to deadhead this thing. I don't want these flowers sitting on my stems all winter, okay? I want to walk out, get rid of those spent blooms. I'm leaving the wood alone. I'm going to do that next March. I don't want to cut this way back yet. I simply want to deadhead it so that I don't have something heavy to grab snow and perhaps break a branch or a stem on my hydrangea over the winter time. So don't think of it as you're going to have to walk out and cut that whole hydrangea back and walk away. Let's just deadhead it real quick here before winter, leave the wood, walk out next March. Now we can cut it back to where we want to start it out for the next season, and off we go for 2022, okay? So a little preview to the pruning class here in 2 weeks. We could probably talk pruning for another hour. So hopefully that got you a few things. Maybe the last thing I would mention is containers, because I'm sure perhaps somebody's already asked Steve about container plants. You know, again, a lot of it depends on what's in that container, but if you've got a good frost-hardy ceramic pot like we sell here at Sunnyside, and I've got a conifer, a shrub, a perennial, anything hardy in it, I'm not worried about the winter, to be honest with you. We'd have to get down really cold into the teens, low teens, single digit. Hasn't happened for a lot of years. Who knows, you know, what this winter brings. But that goes back to the beginning when we talked about watching the weather. If I see the vortex, the Arctic blast coming, yeah, maybe I'll take my pot and shove it up against the house for a few nights, or tuck it into the corner of the garage just to be safe. The one thing I would say with containers is we just can't let them be outside and dry out. We can't let these permanent plants that we want to keep sit out underneath an eave and get drier and drier through the winter and get cold. Now we have a huge chance of desiccation or frost damage. So make sure they're out where they get rained on all year. All my pots are going to be out all winter. Maples, bulbs, anything's in them. Now this is different again if we're talking about tropical annual things, and we go back to that other point where do we choose to bring them to garage, the basement, as a house plant, greenhouse, you know, then we've got to be a little more careful on that respect, okay? So before we do some questions, you know, just like always at Sunnyside, we try to run a couple good specials for the folks that come to the class. This is always a hard one because it's a little bit everywhere the class is. So I think we focused on a couple good products on mulch and compost. You can see behind me, if I lean, I've got a bag of compost and a bag of bark back there. If you want to come down and need some compost, need some bark, we put the bark on 20% off through Friday. You can come down and get a good quality local medium bark. Keep in mind with bark, as you add a lot of bark mulch in your yard, that wood is going to decompose. It looks great on the surface, but I'm going to take some nitrogen out of the soil as that decomposes naturally. So whenever I do bark, I tend to more towards compost myself, but if I did bark, I'm going to put some fertilizer probably down underneath it, or make sure I do next spring so that I've still got happy plants. The other one, the compost, is always to me the way to go. I'm going to add nutrients. I'm going to protect my soil. It's a nice dark black color, but we've got both our bags and the big compressed bales of EB Stone planting compost on sale. Buy 3, get 1 free. So that's a great price on that as well. So whether you're planting, you need some amendment. If you're like me as a gardener, you've always got a stash of at least 5 bales behind the house ready to go at all times, every day of the year. So that may be one where you're like, well, I can use some compost. Come down, grab some. You can even stash it behind the house and have it ready to go for when you do need it over the winter or come springtime too, okay? So couple great sales. Now, classes next weekend, we're taking the weekend off. It's Halloween. Happy Halloween, everybody, early. That next weekend, the 6th and the 7th, we got a couple great ones. We got house plants with Holly. You'll have access to that on Saturday at 10 a.m. Holly's our houseplant manager here. She's awesome with indoor plants. It's a perfect time to kind of think about as we go get in, move more inside for the winter, get some attractive houseplants going. And then, like I mentioned, the pruning. That'll be on Sunday the 7th at 11 a.m. That's a big pruning class. I'll have some slides to show you, some diagrams. We'll go through a lot of information kind of as a winter pruning class. And then we'll follow that up with the second one in January, a little bit more to do with some fruits, some berries, and some other things as well. Then the last class of the year is the 13th. We do Hellebores. I'll be in here talking about the winter jewels of the garden, the Hellebore. That's a great plant for the winter time. So we'll go through everything Hellebore on the 13th. The next day, a wreath opening starts. So here we go with Christmas trees and making our custom wreaths here at Sunnyside. That's a great activity too. So that kind of preview here for the next month. So let's do some questions. I'm guessing maybe Nicole and Steve probably got most of them, but let's see what we got left here.
Yes, Steve got most of them. He's great. You guys have been firing questions at him, and he's been, just knocking them out one by one. So if there's something you haven't gotten answered, go ahead and throw it in the chat, the Q&A box down at the bottom of your screen, and we'll answer it live here. Trevor, I know you talked about some of the tropical things, but what about the really large tropical stuff, like the banana trees, the stuff that you can't kind of move in and over winter? What do you do about those?
That's a really tough one, to be honest with you, because if it's a tropical banana, the red leaf bananas or so things like that, yeah, they can get pretty big, and maybe we don't have enough room, or the wife or the husband, either one, is going to go, you are not bringing that into my living room for the winter time. It's too big. It's a really tough one because you honestly almost need a greenhouse for something like that. That's not one of those plants we can keep alive just above freezing and that kind of thing with much success. Boy, I don't know what to tell you on that one, because you really do got to keep some of that stuff a little bit warmer. If we can't do it in the house, I don't know what your garage situation is. We don't need it 75 degrees, but probably 50. And if we keep it by a window, we're typically okay. I mean, I used to have a mandevilla that I'd throw in my garage on my workbench, and it was kind of by a window. It got some light. Didn't look very nice all winter, but it stayed alive. And then I brought it back out in spring, threw some food on it, and off we go again. The banana is going to be a tough one. I think unless you've got some space, you could certainly cut it back, and it'll start to kind of regrow in the house, and see if that may work a little bit as well.
So if you are going to move stuff in the house, do you want to cut those things back and prune them before you start that transition, or do you want to get them acclimated and then prune them or cut them back?
No, I mean, again, there's a little bit of both depending on the plant. But most of that stuff, yes, you're going to want to cut it back. The fuchsia, the geranium, I mean, the typical things that I hear folks want to try to save, those things are going to get cut back. They don't have to be as warm. They can go in the basement, some other areas, and not in the living room. We don't have to keep those in again, a real warm spot. But I'd say most of that stuff's going to get cut back. But there are a few things, if you're thinking something specific, ask that.
And if you do decide to move something totally indoors, not just inside like a garage, but in your house, do you need to take kind of steps in terms of cooling them down or warming them up, getting them in and out of your house?
Well, if we haven't done it yet, I mean, this is just something, if it was truly a tropical that I'm going to try to keep looking sharp for the winter, I would almost press rewind about a month ago, in mid-late September before we start to get cool. Maybe we get it in a little bit earlier, might still look a little better. If you haven't brought it in, I don't think you've lost it yet. We haven't gotten that cold here at night. You can still go ahead and do it. But it's always a good idea to me, if you've got a garage, maybe you go in there for a few days just to kind of get acclimated, then you go in the house. What I would probably worry more about with some of that stuff is bugs. Typically when we go from outside to inside or inside back to outside, it's like, what happened? Everything just magnetized to it instantly. I would for sure really watch, maybe get some neem oil, something insecticidal soap, something real natural to make sure we're clean when we go in the house, and don't have to worry about it quite as much for bugs as well.
Gotcha. Going back to the banana conversation. So what kind of bananas does Steve have? The ones that he wraps every year?
Yeah. So now that's hardy banana. That's something we could leave outside. Now, the reason Steve always wraps them is his are very old for one, and he doesn't want to start at the ground every year. If I don't wrap the hardy bananas, fiber bananas, they've got a whole bunch of different names. We would never lose those in Washington. It's a root system perennial, but he wants the trunk. So if I'm up and I've got a 6-8 foot trunk, and then I've got my foliage on top, I can cut the foliage off. I just need to wrap that trunk so that it doesn't die down to the ground. We would have to get pretty cold to kill those down to the ground when they're wrapped. He uses, it looks like space insulation, but it's just pipe insulation. We sell it. We have rolls of it here. You can buy, tie it on with some twine. I mean, it's really easy to do. But he's protecting that trunk. It's not that he wants to keep the plant looking like spring all year. We're trying to keep that trunk alive so that next spring, new foliage comes out the top and off we go again. We get bigger and better every season. Again, on a typical winter, would it kill a hardy banana to the ground? Probably not, but he's being safe and smart by doing that because he wants the height every year. If we did get a cold blast at some point, that banana is going to turn to mush and it's going to die of the ground. Now we have to wait for it to come all the way back up and turn back into the tree like you see out in the front road here at Sunnyside.
And they asked about horticultural fleece. Is that another material you could use? Yeah,
fleece is fine. I mean, I've had some people, I know there's one in my neighborhood, and Everett loves burlap, anything just to insulate it a little bit. The pipe insulation is probably the warmest. It's pretty easy just to wrap it around, tie it up, go put it in the garage and bring it back out next year. But it could be burlap. I mean, again, there's so many things that we can mulch with in the year. Cocoa shells, hazelnut shells. I mean, we can go on how to protect the crown. If we're going to go up, though, if you don't mind the little space age, the silver coating on the trunks in the winter, it's probably still the best way to go. But your fleece is fine. Burlap is fine. There's other options as well.
Gotcha. We talked about storing bulbs a little bit, but when you are storing those, do you want to put them in bags, just open on a shelf so they get some airflow in an empty pot? What's the best way to actually store those in?
You don't want to wrap them in plastic. I would not wrap them in total plastic or something like that, but a paper bag's fine. I mean, again, I could pick sawdust, vermiculite. We could probably talk to 8 good dahlia growers right around here to Puget Sound. They probably all tell you something different on what to store your dahlia bulbs in. It's just something that I want to keep it dry, leave them dormant. If it was me, when I was digging my dahlias, I haven't had to now for a number of years, but if I was, I would probably mix up the liquid copper, a little can or tray of a copper fungicide, maybe I dip my bulbs in that to get a shield on them so I don't get rot or anything happen in the winter. I lay those out on newspaper, let them dry. Now I can pop them into some sawdust, you know, a box, whatever I have in the garage. You don't want to keep them in the house. You know, this is something you'd want. I know one of my good friends does a lot of dahlias. He's got a crawl space under his house. That's where all his go. I mean, we just want it where it's out of the weather. It's not going to freeze hard. You know, it could be 38 degrees. I don't care. But as long as it doesn't freeze, we just want to make sure they're dry so that we can bring them back out the next season. Gotcha.
We've got lots of questions about cutting back some more perennial type things, specifically like lavender, ferns, astilbe. What do you?
Well, again, if we think of the perennials in those two big groups, well, actually three. Let's go mushers, you know, the ones that just kind of turn to snot and melt. We got stickies, which perennial, astilbe would be one like that, or we have evergreen perennials. So let the Mother Nature tell you when to do it. I would not run home today and cut all your perennials back. We're not quite there yet. 2 or 3 weeks here, we are going to be there as things go dormant. I've had a couple hostas that melted. They're already out, but not much else besides that. I just want to make sure I cut them back. Now, the ones that worry me that got brought up are the lavender, the fern, some things like that. If we have an evergreen like lavender, I brought up a heuchera, some things like that. I don't want to do a whole lot here this winter. If you want to deadhead them, they got dried flowers, great. I want to cut that back coming out of winter. So if I'm going to shear back my lavender, I'm going to probably walk out there early, mid-March, shear that back, let it start flushing out growth, and then off we go for springtime. And the ferns will be the same way. If I have an evergreen fern, yeah, if I got some brown fronds here and there, get rid of them. That's fine. But I'm not going to cut that crown back until spring. So I'm going to walk out again in March, probably at some point, maybe early April. I'm going to look for all those new fiddleheads coming out of the crown. I could take all the foliage off my sword fern, my deer fern, my tassel fern, all these evergreen things, and have a brand new lush plant for the coming season. That's what I do with all my ferns. I would never leave the old foliage there year to year. I'm going to let those clean up one time a year and let them start over again. I think, did someone say hellebores? You know, we'll do that at the class here in a couple of weeks, but hellebores is another one. You know, that's a great evergreen perennial that blooms in the middle of the winter up here. We're going to have great color on that when we don't have a lot of color on plants. You know, my rule with hellebores is I don't want last year's leaves, so I always walk out at Christmas, maybe early January. I want to remove all those old evergreen leaves and throw them in the compost. I don't want the bugs underneath them. And I want to see all those flowers come out of the ground in the middle. And then I've got fresh foliage that comes out, and I got a great plant for a whole nother year. So maybe that one's a little different as well.
Gotcha. And speaking of pruning, I know that we could go into a whole, yeah. Exactly. You talked a little bit about roses and said, we're not going to go hack back climbing roses. Is there a quick, brief synopsis you can give us of, a climbing rose pruning, what that would look like?
That'd be real easy with climbing roses to me, whether it's on a trellis, an arbor, I don't know what kind of situation you've got it on. I'm going to get rid of anything that's not as thick as a pencil, first of all. So it's not like I'm not going to cut it back at all and leave everything. I'm going to try to look at the wood structure and say, yeah, I want to keep all this. It's going in the direction I want, but I'm going to get rid of some of these little pieces here and there that aren't very strong and leave that base structure. So next year I've got brand new growth. Here comes the flower and off we go. So I don't know, maybe I would never cut it back more than a third. That might be a good rule with the climbing rose. And I would look at it more on the wood. Disease goes away. Blackwood goes away. Okay, what's left? Now I'm going to get rid of anything that's maybe not as thick as a pencil. Now I've got some nice structure left for the winter, and then I'm going to have a nicer rose come 2022.
Gotcha. We don't usually talk about specific zones other than our own, but this one kind of borders in our world about, zone 7A, and I know we're kind of 7 to 8, about putting dahlias just in a cold frame as opposed to like digging them up. Is that something you'd advise doing, or?
I don't mind the cold frame idea. I'm assuming they're talking about digging the clumps of tubers and hanging them somewhere. you know, again, I would watch the weather. They just can't freeze like that out of the ground. So, I mean, if you're okay, you know, being pretty comfortable, it's not going to get very cold. Or if it does, maybe you've got a little space heater you can throw in there and just keep it barely above freezing. I'm okay with that. But typically you're a little safer. I don't know. Are they in pots? Does this person have them in pots, or are they in the ground? Because if they were in pots, you know, I might worry a little more about that than being in the ground. If she's talking about digging them and hanging them to dry, whatever. I mean, that's what I do in my garage essentially once they dry out, and then I store the tubers. When I did that, if it's in a pot, I'd really watch the temperature, because man, if we do get cold, who knows what this winter is going to do. I mean, that's always the hard part up here. We could have one where we do get some cold, or last year, I don't know that we even really had a frost until we got to February kind of thing. So watch the weather would be my advice on that. You see anything coming mid-20s and down from that, I would probably run out, maybe throw them in the garage, or do a little extra protection for a night or two.
Excellent. Yeah, she said that she can dig them up. So I think that was probably great advice. Yeah. We covered a lot of ground. I think, you know, this subject is so broad, and there's so many small, you know, nuanced situations that can come up. So if something does come up when you're putting your garden to bed, reach out. You know, it's better to ask questions than, you know, take a gamble and maybe lose something. So we're happy to help as you start to tuck things in for the winter and you're just unsure. We are always here 7 days a week. Our email is sunnyside@msn.com. Send us an email, send us even some pictures. We're happy to, you know, give you tips on whatever your specific situation is. And as always, you know, we really appreciate you joining us. We hope that we'll see you back in 2 weeks after Halloween, and that we'll still see you around the holidays too. We got lots of stuff going on. If you are out of Washington, we do sell our wreaths online. So take a look at those. Maybe that's something you can, you know, have a little bit of Sunnyside in your home on the other side of the country. We really appreciate you joining us, and we'll see you later.
Thanks, everybody. Happy fall. It's going to keep raining today, so stay dry.